In this video, we're going to talk about simple time signatures. And when I say simple time signatures, that's not just a matter of subjectivity. It's not my opinion what's simple and what's complicated. Simple is a technical term. The other possibility we have is compound, which we'll talk about sooner. And there's some other things we'll talk about later. But simple is a very specific thing when we talk about time signatures. So first of all, what is a time signature? Well, a time signature is basically telling you how much space you have in between each measure, right? If we have our bar lines like this, unless we're talking about something really unusual or from a different part of the world, or we're getting into the 20th and 21st centuries, we're pretty much going to have a consistent amount of space in each of these measures. So this is telling us exactly how much space we have. And before we go too far, let's just talk about how do we identify time signatures. Well, we see something like this. We see two numbers, one on the top, one on the bottom. It's not a fraction. People often tend to add a fraction line here when they're first starting, but you don't need to do that. The way we identify a time signature is we say the top number and the bottom number. So this time signature is called 4, 4. This time signature is called 3, 4. This time signature would be called 2, 8. And you can't necessarily just put any number you want here. There are specific reasons why we have these numbers, which we'll talk about. But these are all possible time signatures, and this is how you would say them. Well, we're going to ignore the bottom number for right now. This tends to be the one that confuses people a little bit more. And let's just talk about the top number. The top number is telling you how many beats you have in a measure. What is a beat? Well, a beat is really just a pulse. It's just a steady pulse like this. Dum, 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 dum. A lot of people say things like, oh, this is a good beat, or I like that beat. And you really can't actually have a good beat. They can just be faster or slower. I think a lot of the times people are thinking of a groove or a feel or something like that when they say that. But a beat is just simply a pulse. That's it. There's nothing else to it. Now, let's assume for our purposes that we are, again, we're not going to worry about the bottom number right now. But we're going to pretend that the quarter note always gets a beat. That tends to be what people learn at first, and we're going to keep it like that for right now. So whenever I say something has 4 beats in a measure, that will basically translate to having 4 quarter notes in a measure. So here is a possibility, 4 quarter notes, of something that I could have in a 4/4 time signature. Again, don't worry about the bottom 4, but there are 4 beats in a measure, 4 quarter notes, each one gets a beat. I could also do something like this. Beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4. Remember, 2/8 notes equals a quarter note, right? So if a quarter note gets a beat, an eighth note gets half of a beat, it adds up to a whole beat. Here's beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, and beat 4. This is possible in 4/4. Here's another possibility in 4/4. All right, so in this case, I have 1 and 2 are coming from the half note, right? A half note will get 2 beats if a quarter note gets 1 beat. A quarter rest gives me still a beat. It still counts as a beat. I'm still feeling the pulse there. And my last quarter note gives me another beat. All of these things are possible in 4/4. All of these examples have 4 beats in a measure. Well, when we're talking about simple meters, there's really only 3 choices that we're going to see on the top. We're either going to see a 2, a 3, or a 4. And so we're going to call the ones with 2, we're going to call that duple meter. Right? Duple like 2. We're going to call the ones with 3 triple meter. And the ones with 4 quadruple meter. Anytime I see a 4 on the top like this, I can call it a quadruple meter. This is a simple quadruple meter. 1, 2, 3, 4. Still 4 beats here. 1, 2, 3, 4. What's an example of a triple meter? Oops, let me leave a little bit more space for that. Here we go. 3, 4. So now I'm going to have 3 quarter notes in a measure. 1, 2, 3. Or I could do something like this. I could have a dotted half note. That's my whole measure, right? 1, 2, 3. I could have, let's say, a quarter note, an eighth rest, and an eighth note, and another quarter note. Again, it's 1. Beat 2 has both of these, and here's beat 3. All of these fit into a triple simple meter, 3/4. And finally, I can have 2/4, a duple meter, and I can make an example like this. Let's say, well, I'll start off really simple. I could have 2 quarter notes, right? I could have just a half note. That's fine too. One thing that's a little strange with meters that you might not be expecting is, think about this. If you remember from our notation video, what this symbol means. This is a whole rest, if you remember that. Well, a whole rest, a whole note gets 4 beats, so a whole rest gets 4 beats also, sort of, but there's a weird exception we make, and it's really just because it's a shorthand. It's a lot easier to do this. When I'm in 3/4 and I have nothing happening in the measure, I can make a whole rest. And in this case, it really symbolizes 3 beats. Even though it technically should add up to 4 beats, we use it as a shorthand. Why? Well, if I had to write a whole bunch of rests, imagine if I had to write all the parts for orchestra players, like before the days of computers, and I had to write rests for everyone for measures and measures and measures. It's a lot easier to write a whole rest than it would be to write a half rest and a quarter rest every single time I have to measure 3/4. So this is just simply a whole measure of rest. Okay, now we're going to do something a little bit trickier, which is what happens when the bottom number changes. Well, the bottom number stands for the type of note that gets the beat. That's something that I heard a lot growing up, and I never really understood what it meant until I got older. I think piano teachers have a hard time explaining what this means to little kids, because for most of the music that we play as kids and as beginners, even for years, tends to have the quarter note as the beat. Well, what happens when it changes? Let's give another example. Let's say instead of 2/4, I were to do 2/8. Well, now instead of the quarter note getting the beat, an eighth note gets the beat. Think about that. 8 represents eighth note, right? 16 on the bottom would represent a 16th note. 32 on the bottom would represent a 32nd note. Well, we don't say a fourth note, but what would a fourth be? It would be a quarter note, right? If I put a 2 down there, can you think about what that would represent? If I had a time signature like 2, 2, we don't say a second note, well, we would say a half, right? So this would mean the half note gets the beat. So in 2/8, what I'm saying is there are 2 beats in every measure, and the eighth note is the note that's getting the beat. In other words, instead of having 2 quarter notes, I would have 2 eighth notes. Just like that, right? I could have an eighth rest and an eighth note. That works too. That also fits into 2/8. What if I have the time signature 3/16? Well, think about that. That means I would have 3 beats in every measure, and the 16th note would get the beat. So now I could have 1, 2, 3. 3/16 notes. That could be a whole measure. All right. One more piece that we're going to talk about with simple time signatures, which is, how do we know when to beam? Well, basically, we want our beaming to reflect the time signature. So let's do this. Let's go to 4/4. And let's suppose that I had 3/8 notes. Let's do 3/8 notes. And you know what? Let's make it more interesting. Let's do 5/8 notes. And then an eighth rest and a quarter note. All right, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/8 notes. So how do I want to beam this? Well, really what I want to do is I want to reflect my time signature in the beaming. If I do something like this, and I beam 5 of these notes together, It's actually kind of confusing. I know it might not seem like it. It might seem like that makes sense, but if you were to sight read a piece of music that looked like this, I guarantee it would be pretty confusing. Because your brain wants to organize things visually. You can easily see that this is the last beat of music. This is beat 4. But this should be beat 3 rather. If I go backward, this is beat 2, this is beat 1. And I'm really not reflecting that in my beaming. So I really should break this up. And I should have this be a standalone 8th note. That way I can clearly see this is beat 3. What about the other two? Well, technically, and I've had some composition teachers that were, kind of tough about this. Technically speaking, these should be broken up too. I should really technically see beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, and beat 4. But just, I think, over the years, tradition has evolved. We have a pretty easy time in 4/4 seeing one half of the measure and another half of the measure. So it's kind of become acceptable to do this, to have 4 8th notes being together. That's okay. What if I were, let's go back to my measure of 3/16. Again, it's become acceptable to do this, right? If I'm just showing 3/16 notes. What if I'm doing something a little bit more complicated? Like what if I want to do 1/16 note, 2 32nd notes. Remember that's going to be 3 beams, and another 16th note. So in this example, I'm really making an effort to show 1 beat, 2 beats, 3 beats. If you found that video helpful, please click the subscribe button below to find more videos just like it.